Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're cutting through the noise to look at how politics actually works, rather than how we might wish it worked. We're going to completely unpack the raw, unvarnished reality of political power, zooming in on exactly how Niccolò Machiavelli defines it, how you get it, and honestly, more importantly, how you keep it.
So, to kick things off, I want you to picture this. Imagine for just a second that you've just conquered the government of an entire country. Your allies, they're banging on your door demanding immediate rewards. Your enemies are lurking in the shadows just waiting for your first little misstep so they can tear you down. And the public? Well, they want security, sure, but they can flip on you in the blink of an eye. So what would you do? Are you going to try to always be just, super generous, and morally flawless? Or would you be willing to make some incredibly tough, maybe even ruthless decisions to maintain stability and protect your throne?
Seção 1. A política como ela é. A quebra das idealizações.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Over 500 years ago, this Italian thinker decided to tackle that exact scenario. But he didn't do it by daydreaming about a perfect world. Nope, he threw all that idealization right out the window. Niccolò Machiavelli realized that studying these perfect, imaginary leaders didn't help anybody. You had to look at how rulers actually behaved in a world completely driven by ambition, conflict, and fear. And look, this ruthless perspective didn't just appear out of nowhere. Born in 1469, he lived in an Italy that wasn't some unified, peaceful country. It was this highly fragmented chessboard that was constantly bathed in blood. He literally experienced this stuff in the trenches as a diplomat for Florence. But then, in 1512, everything fell apart for him. The incredibly powerful Medici family took back control, and Machiavelli didn't just lose his job. He was thrown in prison, exiled, and even tortured because they suspected him of plotting a conspiracy. It was actually during this exact exile, totally cut off from public life in 1513, that his obsession with political order pushed him to write his most famous and absolutely most controversial work, The Prince.
And what came out of that brutal first-hand experience is the core concept behind his entire philosophy, political realism. Basically, Machiavelli started analyzing power based on the concrete, on-the-ground conditions of society and how humans actually behave, totally raw and unfiltered. And he realized something pretty uncomfortable. The logic of keeping a state running often crashes head-on into personal, individual morality. Like, an everyday person can afford to suffer the consequences of keeping a promise, but a ruler? They literally can't. If a leader makes a decision, even a really well-intentioned one, and it causes the country to collapse, the entire population pays that price.
Seção 2. As forças do poder. A engrenagem da política.
So if just having good intentions doesn't cut it, how does a leader actually survive all this chaos? Well, Machiavelli believed a ruler's success is entirely dictated by two massive colliding forces. The first one is virtue. But hold on, you've got to be really careful here, because we are absolutely not talking about the traditional moral virtue of just being a sweet, good person. For Machiavelli, virtue is 100% pragmatic. It's the essential toolkit of a leader: courage, razor-sharp intelligence, astuteness, and above all else, flexibility. It's that rare ability to act efficiently and instantly adapt to political situations that are constantly shifting under your feet.
To really drive this home, he used one of the most brilliant visual analogies in all of political science. He split the ideal ruler into two animals, the fox and the lion. On one hand, a ruler absolutely has to be like the lion, right? Strong, dominant, fully capable of using raw authority to scare off wolves and looming threats. But here's the catch: brute force is blind. A lion will easily walk right into a trap. Because of that, the leader also needs the cunning and the sheer cynicism of the fox. You need to be able to spot the tricks, dodge the conspiracies, and master the art of negotiation. To actually succeed, a ruler has to be this perfect hybrid of both beasts.
And they need to be that hybrid because they're constantly up against the second major force, fortuna. In Machiavelli's world, fortuna is this wild, unpredictable power of chance. It's the blind luck and totally uncontrollable events that just happened, like a surprise invasion or a massive economic crash. He actually compares fortune to a violent, raging river. When the flood comes, it just wipes out everything in its path. So what's a leader supposed to do? Well, during the quiet times of peace, they have to use their virtue to build up the dikes, the canals, and the defenses. You have to prepare so you can contain the water when the river inevitably overflows.
And this brilliantly illustrates his ultimate equation for political survival. Actual, effective political action is really just your virtue reacting to the sheer insanity of fortuna. Fortuna rolls the dice, it sets the stage. But virtue determines exactly how you respond. A weak ruler just wastes the peaceful years. But a leader with high virtue? They don't just survive the storm. They actually use the floodwaters to drown their enemies.
Seção 3. É melhor ser temido? A psicologia do poder.
Which brings us directly to the single most famous psychological dilemma in everything Machiavelli ever wrote. When you're trying to lead the masses, is it better to be loved or is it better to be feared? Honestly, Machiavelli admits that in a perfect dream world, you'd want to be both. But in reality, you almost always have to pick one. And love, he argues, is incredibly flimsy. People will cheer for you on the sunny days, but the second fortune turns and a real crisis hits, that love evaporates. Fear, on the other hand, creates a much more predictable obedience. Why? Because it's rooted in the constant dread of punishment. Mathematically speaking, it's just the safer bet. But, and this is a huge but, there's a hard red line you can never cross. You can be feared, but you must absolutely never be hated. Hate is the exact fuel that sparks the conspiracies and revolts that burn empires to the ground.
To make sure a leader never crosses over into being hated, he leaves us with this massive reality check. Using force when you don't absolutely need to isn't a show of strength, it's a sign of incompetence. It is not virtue. Machiavelli was definitely not out here telling leaders to run a reign of terror or be cruel just for the fun of it. If you're constantly violent and totally unpredictable, people are going to get desperate and eventually they will hate you enough to overthrow you. True authority has to be surgical. It's coldly calculated, applied swiftly just to restore order, and then you stop.
Seção 4. A ilusão da aparência. Os fins justificam os meios?
Let's move on and see how this all builds up in the realm of public perception. Because in politics, just being competent, not going to cut it. You have to absolutely master the illusion of appearance. You have to understand that massive gap between what your real intentions are and what your public image is. Look, the public almost never gets to see the shady backroom deals. They strictly judge what is put right in front of their faces. So your reputation isn't just an ego trip, it is a literal tool of power. Machiavelli taught that a leader has to look pious, honest, and incredibly ethical at all times. You have to play the part perfectly. But here is the absolute key. Internally, you have to be ready and completely willing to act in total opposition to all of that, the exact second your government's survival is on the line. If you lose the public narrative, you might as well just hand over the crown.
And that, of course, leads us right to this. The ends justify the means. I mean, it's almost impossible to hear the name Machiavelli and not immediately think of this quote, right? Well, here's a crazy fact. He never actually wrote that exact phrase in The Prince, not once. It's actually just a popular, kind of exaggerated summary that people invented over the years to simplify a political philosophy that is way more sophisticated than just a catchy slogan.
So the crucial point is what he actually defended, which is this. In the political arena, the means you use are almost always judged by the results they end up producing. Super harsh, even downright ruthless actions. They only get a pass from history if, and literally only if, they actually succeed in saving and stabilizing the state. If a leader uses horrible tactics and still fails to keep order, they don't get a pass. They just go down in history as a cruel, useless tyrant. It's the final result, the lasting stability, that retroactively makes the ugly process acceptable.
Seção 5. O legado na era atual, Maquiavel hoje.
Because look, conquering power, whether you do it through brute force or just blind luck, that's actually the easy part. The real nightmare is staying on top, day in and day out. So let's shift gears and look at how this whole machine of power applies today. Machiavelli actually left us a pretty solid checklist for political longevity. If you want to dodge rebellions and survive coups, you got to do 4 things. 1. Lock down popular support, because the masses are always your best shield. 2. Build incredibly strong, organized institutions. 3. You need your own fiercely loyal military, because hired mercenaries will absolutely run for the hills when real danger shows up. And 4. You have to strictly monitor and control the elite factions. Why? Because they're the ones with the cash and the influence to actually fund a massive conspiracy against you.
But of course, when we take Machiavelli's ruthless playbook and drop it into our modern democratic world, it hits some serious brick walls. Today, leaders can't just do whatever they want. They have to deal with constitutions, democratic elections, the relentless pressure of a free press, the separation of powers, and most importantly, fundamental human rights. So today, we don't really read Machiavelli as an instruction manual for dictators. Instead, we use it as a political X-ray. It's this incredibly sharp tool that helps us look at our current leaders and ask, are they actually acting for the greater good of society, or are they just using their shiny public reputation as a mask to cynically cling to power?
Which leaves us with this massive, enduring conflict. 500 years later, we still have to ask, should a modern ruler strictly prioritize absolute moral principles, even if sticking to those principles causes the entire state to collapse? Or should they be willing to get their hands dirty and coldly adapt to the circumstances just to guarantee the survival of their people? It's a pretty provocative thought, right? It really forces us to look past the polished political speeches and see how the gears are actually turning behind the scenes. I really hope this explainer gave you a totally new lens for looking at the world stage. Thanks so much for hanging out with us, and as always, keep questioning what you see.